Hotel in Peoria. Anyway, I don't know where I was going with that.
Your anxiety level.
The anxiety level. 14-day
14-day
events,
events.
4 or 5 days in advance. 4 or 5 days of the event, we evacuate, and then eventually they let us back in. And if it's not bad, you come back right away, or you just stay. Depending on what level. If it's a 1 through a 5. And then you come home and you assess the challenges, and in 4 or 5 days you've gotten with your insurance company, and you're not fixed. I mean, you're far from fixed. We're still really not totally fixed from Katrina, Rita. If you've been in New Orleans, is far from fixed. But at least the anxiety level goes down. With this one, the anxiety level went like this. And the media level went like this. And then it went up, and it went up. And if Katrina was, I hope you're football fans, because I am, if Katrina was the NFC Championship game last year when the Saints beat Minnesota, like hopefully they will this Thursday night, if that was the media event, the NFC Championship, this event has been the Super Bowl of media. I mean, it has been unbelievable. In one day, Kevin and I both do the media for our company, and we're involved in a lot of other things. We had over 31 contacts here at my small company from the media in one day. It was telephone to video camera, it was cell phone, it was just amazing. And it peaked sometime June, I think, end of June, beginning of July. Of course, they capped the well July 15th. That's 6, 8 weeks ago. And still today, we're seeing media events as a result of it. The concern last week with that little, not really a very big rig fire, but a tragedy nonetheless. Even though I saw all the guys and they were all fine, but little fire, and I had the chair of the hospital board right down the street where they brought all those guys, and we must have had 30 media running around the outside of the hospital, on the bridge, shooting down at the hospital, watching the helicopters come in. It was just amazing. I mean, geez. So the media is still here. We've had media from every continent except Antarctica.
Nobody there. And penguins.
Japan TV. Next week, Slovenia TV. Have you ever heard of Slovenia TV? I remember that. We've had more TV, video camera crews come into our area than ever. So this has been our Super Bowl of media. What is our greatest challenge as a result of this? The resource, because they opened some freshwater diversions, which changed the salinity regimes to keep the oil out.
Okay, can you just repeat that?
Yes.
Resource.
The resource, I think generally the resource will be okay. There'll be some spotted issues with certain things, but I think oysters got impacted the greatest. And I say that because we levied the rivers in the 1930s. Okay, we decided that was what we were going to do to keep people from flooding. It made a lot of sense, but at that time they didn't quite understand all the environmental impacts as a result of that. So we got this great levee around the Mississippi River. If you're in New Orleans, you're looking up at the river. Most of you may have realized that. So we've levied the river very well, and we've begun to lose, the salt waters come in, and we've begun to lose our marshlands, because 2 types of plant life in saltwater marsh and hundreds in freshwater marsh, and as it comes in, it kills off the freshwater marsh, and it can't take over quick enough. You're not adding that topsoil. We drain 2/3 of the United States and parts of Canada, so we're that topsoil that's coming down here, the floods create, maintaining the land. All of a sudden, we're not adding anymore, so we begin to subside. So we're subsiding, we're losing it, and today, I don't know what it is, 15 to 20 square miles a year, up to 40 at one point. So we're trying to save those estuaries, and in saving them, what we're trying to do is recreate the natural environment. So the levees created a false environment, but oysters moved in with the salt water because it's 5 to 15 parts per thousand salinities. Oysters moved in, people moved down. There are problems with both of those, but we moved our oyster producing areas up. So we have, now we're closer to the river, so when they decided to break the river, basically recreate what Mother Nature was doing before and create floods, when they did that, if you don't manage that flow, which the plan was to manage the flow, they opened them up wide open down below New Orleans on the east and west side of the river, and in what we call our prime oyster harvest areas, public and private. and they opened it to keep the oil out. You remember about, 15 weeks ago now, there was a huge flood in Nashville. When that slug of water came down, it came down through the Mississippi River, and it was a slug, and so it pushed, and when they opened those things, it pushed the oil out. It worked relatively well. I mean, it kept the oil out. Generally speaking, Louisiana has 7,500 miles of shoreline. Only about 400 miles were really oiled. I tell this story a lot to the media. Hurricane Katrina, I spent a lot of time after Katrina in helicopters on the land and on the water. And I've spent a lot of time since Deepwater Horizon in helicopters on the land. Very little actually on the water this time. I didn't go out on boats. I don't think I went out on a boat since Deepwater Horizon. And Hurricane Katrina, you could take 100 pictures and you couldn't get it. Hurricane Katrina was so massive, it was almost unbelievable. You couldn't tell the story. Sorry, you guys are great at it, but you couldn't tell the Katrina story. I mean, you can't, this documentary Spike Lee does and these guys, they capture some of it. It's just too massive to capture. It was just unbelievable. Deepwater Horizon, you could take one picture and it appeared 100 times worse. That's how I describe the difference between Katrina, which was largest natural disaster in U.S. history. 100 pictures, you couldn't tell the story. You really couldn't. And a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? All those things. Couldn't tell with 100 pictures. Deepwater Horizon, one picture made it look 100 times worse. Now, granted, that picture of the oiled pelicans made me sick. I mean, it looks bad. But, you know, it happened. And we've got 400 miles of shoreline out of 7,500 miles of shoreline. That 7,500 miles goes in and out and around all the lakes. That's not bad. It worked, what we did with those freshwater diversions. But just like building an interstate, you got to run somebody over when you're trying to save somebody else, right, or trying to improve. So it basically ran over our prime oyster grounds. And so now there's discussions about who's responsible. Is BP responsible because the state opened them to keep the oil off? Is the state responsible? Somebody somewhere will decide that, not me. I think it's BP. You know, we're doing the thing to protect the public, just like they were out there with booms. And if the booms damaged something, it would be BP's responsibility. Similar type thing. It was one of the tools the state had in their tool chest.
Well, and a dead oyster is better than an oiled oyster because the oysters will actually survive oil. And they'll take it in, and it's a crazy thing to see. I mean, they look like they're black, they smell like diesel, but they'll live. You know, an adult oyster can live with oil in its body. So an oiled oyster is a 7-year problem for us because you got to wait for those oysters that took in oil to die, and then you got to wait for a new crop to happen. So you can't sell while there's oysters oil in it. Where freshwater coming in and killing an area is terrible. I mean, we don't want that, but it kills everything, and it will grow back. Once the salinity comes back, they'll grow back, and so you have a 3 or 4 year recovery rather than a 5 or 7 year recovery. So in the end, you'd much rather the fresh water and no oil than oil and no fresh water.
Any other questions? Because we could talk for a long time.
Yeah.
So we really can. We're eight.
Or the
Let's
oysters,
get to the
big question, like, are the oysters safe
Absolutely.
to eat now?
Absolutely.
So-
Very few oysters were oiled at all in this event. And the areas that had any oil, it's predominantly the Barataria Bay around Grand Isle, those oysters areas have been closed since May 28th.
But
Or,
you've seen
well,
all
sorry,
of your
17th.
oyster beds and there's no black oyster, there's no tarred oyster. Because I know that they shut them off and you don't
A
know.
lot of them were closed, and they were
Yeah.
closed based on trajectories that NOAA was putting out, the model they were using to show where was the oil going, the sheens, what was happening with the oil. The model, you know, was 1 day old the day after the event. It wasn't very defined, and sometimes models take 5 to 10 years to really develop. This was every day they were developing the model, and it wasn't working real well. And the winds, what moved the oil? Was it winds? Was it current? We really learned that it was mostly current versus winds. I'll never forget Jazz Fest weekend. It was supposed to blow like 40 miles an hour from the southeast, and the oil was sitting off the east side of the